Welcome to the Average Joe Jiu-Jitsu Podcast, episode 26, Richard Jackson. Richard Jackson is the owner and head instructor at Samurai Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Academy, located at 2125 Winchester Blvd in Campbell, California. Richard trained for over 10 years at the Renzo Gracie New York City Academy's world-famous Blue Basement and was promoted to brown belt by Master Renzo Gracie and Professor John Danaher. After relocating to Northern California with his family, Rich was awarded his black belt by Professor Gumby Marques, who was a third-degree black belt under the legendary Master Ralph Gracie. Rich was also recently promoted to second-degree black belt by Professor Gumby Marques. Rich also holds the rank of black belt in Judo. Rich, thanks for coming on the podcast today and speaking to me. How you doing?
My pleasure. Doing great. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. We've been trying to work out a date and time, and we finally got here. So I just like to start out with background. So, how old are you, if you don't mind sharing that, and where did you grow up? And
so I'm 50. I just turned 50. Well, actually not just. So I turned 50 in July last year. And I was born in Pennsylvania, southeastern Pennsylvania, Philadelphia suburb area. Mm-hmm. And, as a kid, we kind of moved around a little bit between Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Connecticut. And then, I went back to Pennsylvania for high school. I went to Penn State for college. And then for grad school, I went to the University of Miami. And for law school, I went to Columbia University in New York City. So that's been kind of up and down the East Coast, but most of my life, until I moved out to California, I was, in kind of the Northeast.
Oh, cool. How old were you when you moved out here?
We moved out here in early 2012.
Okay. So I'm not that great so 10 years ago.
Yeah.
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 40. Yeah. Nice.
Almost exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And what was your first exposure to martial arts? How'd you get started in martial arts?
As a kid, I think, there was Kung Fu theater on Sundays, mm-hmm. and Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris movies, mm-hmm. comic books. I think those were kind of the what I knew about martial arts. Every once in a while there'd be some reference to karate or judo, but you didn't really get to see any of that stuff. Even the pro or high level amateur stuff, you wouldn't really see unless ABC Wide World of Sports, put some wrestling match or karate match. You wouldn't really get to see it unless you went to the movies. Every once in a while there'd be some random reference on TV, but I didn't really start doing jiu-jitsu or any martial arts until I was out of college.
Wow.
So yeah, around 1994, because then I'll tell you, when I was a kid, I would get into a lot of trouble and a lot of fights. And I remember, not a lot, not like every day at school, but I was a kid growing up, got into scraps, whatever. And I remember asking, every kid loves martial arts, right? To the extent they know anything about it. I think I asked my mother to sign up, at some karate school or something. And she's like, why would I pay money for you to learn how to fight? You're doing it, and I think I said something like, yeah, but I don't win them all. And, and she's like, yeah, okay, well, maybe you shouldn't be fighting at all. So it wasn't until I actually could pay for my own martial arts lessons that I started doing any martial arts. And that was probably around 90. I want to say I graduated college in 94. So it was around 94, I started doing Taekwondo or something, because that was the only thing you could, I kind of had I'd heard of jiu-jitsu, I had heard of judo. None of those things were really available. It was mostly Kempo and karate and Taekwondo. Went back in 94, at least in the, Philadelphia suburban area.
Right.
So I didn't really start jiu-jitsu. I think in 94, that was when the first couple of UFCs were held. And frankly, I don't remember which one I saw first. It could have been UFC 2, it could have been UFC 1. I don't remember, but I remember seeing Royce Gracie. And there was a lot of buzz around UFC in the early days. Nothing had ever been seen like that before by, the vast majority of people, we all had heard of like Kumite from like Jean-Claude, you know, like Bloodsport.
The Bloodsport, yeah.
So it was like, oh, it was going to be a real life Kumite.
Yeah,
Of course,
right.
you're going to watch that.
Right.
So I just saw that and I was like, oh man, I saw Hoist, you know, beating guys. I mean, just like totally roided out beasts like Chemo. I don't know if he was actually roided out, but Chemo and Dan Severn and Shamrock. And I was like, you know, and Hoist was like 170. I mean, he looked like me.
Yeah.
You know, maybe even skinnier. And I was like, man, I got to learn how to do this stuff. And as it happened, you know, I was really lucky because Steve Maxwell had a school back then in Philadelphia. And, you know, it was only about an hour away from where I would drive into the city and to take classes with him at his school. And he was like I think he had just gotten his purple belt.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. So he was under, I think, Horian and Helson at that time. They were still together. And so that's when I first started doing, you know, serious, you know, training in jiu-jitsu.
What was it like to train with Steve Maxwell? I mean, he's like one of the, you know, early legends. Yeah.
He's first of all, he's like one of the fittest human beings on the planet. I mean, you can watch videos of him still to this day. I mean, he's got to be his, 60s.
Yeah, something like that. I follow him on Instagram. Yeah.
He's a pioneer. I mean, he's also famous for, you know, what he's done in the kettlebell kind of, arena and his role in bringing kettlebells. And I can tell you stories about that. Well, maybe one or two. And he's like a human vice, you know, that never gets tired. I remember rolling with him. He wrestled in college, I believe. Yeah. He wrestled, I think, at Westchester State, which is where my mother went to school. I kind of grew up on Westchester State. But he, you know, he brought a lot of, you know, that wrestling background and knowledge along with the submission, you know, repertoire and the, you know, positional kind of framework that we kind of all got in jiu-jitsu in the early days. And, you know, rolling with him was, I will just say it was not pleasant. But it was, you know, but it was inspiring because, you know, here was this guy. Yeah. He was kind of a physical, he's not a big guy, you know, like when you look at him, you're like, I don't want to hurt this guy. And then you're like, oh man, when is this guy going to get off me? You know? But yeah, he was just like a vice, you know, he'd grab you and you couldn't get away, you know, and he could keep really good pressure from every position. And of course, you know, I always try to think about like, what would it be like if I were a black belt, like a new black belt with Steve or anybody, you know, what would it have been like to roll with them when, you know, when they were at their peak or whatever, when Steve was, you know, purple or brown or black belt. And, because, you know, when you're brand new and you don't know anything, even a blue belt feels like a ton of bricks on top of you.
Right.
You know, and they can just submit you at will. So it's, I like to say at some point, you don't really know, you can't tell the difference between like, when you're a white belt, you can't tell the difference between a black belt and a world-class black belt. Because either one is just going to wreck you, you know, with ease. And it's not until you kind of climb up the ladder of knowledge and experience that you start to understand or appreciate the differentials in skill and experience that you'll encounter when you train with people that are, you know, higher up on the hierarchy. So, you know, Steve was very good and very good as far as I was concerned. But he would, you know, it's interesting to think like, you know, what he would have been like or where he was in the hierarchy at his time and even today. But I can tell you, you know, back in 1996 or 5, you know, he was great.
Awesome.
You know.
Yeah, he's still, I mean, there's still a lot of respect for him. I mean, he's probably at this point, not the physical specimen he was, but he's still going. I mean, he's still training and he's still teaching people like privately, I guess, or actually, I think he's actually training at an academy up in Washington where he lives now. It looks like he got like he bought one of those little houses or settled down. So he's not traveling as much like he used to.
Yeah, he used to be like a real nomad, you know. I think I don't know what happened to his, like, you know, like when he left Philadelphia and when he started traveling the world. He did like some videos, you know, he did like the Turkish, like oil wrestling. He did a bunch of different things. He's a real, I think he's like a nomad in a lot of different ways, not just like his propensity to travel.
Yeah.
He's a seeker, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and that's why he was interested in jiu-jitsu. And he would go down to Brazil and he would spend time with Elio and he would go to Torrance. And he's just a guy who's really curious and obsessive, you know. So it's some of us, we get interested. Hold on. I think you're freezing up, so I'll just wait a second.
Okay. I can still hear you, but let's see. Here you are. You're back. All right. I think. No.
Are you back?
There we go. Now I'm back. I can still hear you the whole time.
Okay.
I hate that.
So you want me to
No, I got you. I got the whole thing.
Got it? Okay.
I got the whole thing.
So yeah, so he was, you know, whereas one of us, or, you know, most of us will get a little curious and you'll kind of do a little bit of dabbling. He was a guy that when, you know, he got his teeth into something, you know, from an interest perspective, he just would not let it go. He needs to go all the way down the rabbit hole.
Right.
100% commitment. So
right.
Yeah, I remember respect for him. And I'm sure he's probably still in better shape right now at whatever age he is than, you know, I was or am now or what was when I was 30, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I guess for a lot of people. Yeah. He's still in pretty good shape, I would say, for his age.
I think his knees are wrecked now. And I know even when I was there and I was in touch with him, he had some hip issues, you know, so, yeah, I was really grateful to Steve for, you know, being a great first instructor, you know. He was, you know, just having that level of curiosity and really being eager to share. And he had a very strong perspective on jiu-jitsu and taught a certain way. And there were a lot of really good guys that are still in the game that came up under Steve and that I got to train with in the early days. So I'm always be grateful to Steve Maxwell. He was always really good to me, even though I was just, you know, a random guy that came into the gym for a couple of years or even less than a year.
Right. No, yeah, it's really cool. I mean, even back then, I would think he being a purple belt was like a unicorn back then. That was like really rare.
I mean, I'll tell you a story, you know, like it wasn't until Renzo's that I got to train with anyone over kind of a blue belt level.
Right.
You know, Steve was a purple belt, but everyone else was like a blue belt. There were no other purple belts when I was at Steve's. And even when I was in Miami and I trained with Pedro Valente, who was a black belt, you know, there weren't a lot, maybe there were a couple purple belts. There were no brown belts. There were no brown belts. I met one American brown belt in Miami when I was there in 2 years. And other than that, I'd seen black belts, a few, and everybody else was like either a white or a blue belt. And that was it. Yeah. And so, yeah, Steve is a purple belt. And he was getting, you know, lessons directly from Horian and Helson and Euler and Elio, and going to Brazil back in 94, 95, 96. You know, this was before you could get a lot of videos. There was obviously no internet. There were no internet video. So, you know, the knowledge, the information deficit or, you know, differential between the people who were actually interacting with high level black belts and the people who were not was just, you know, huge.
Right. So what are some of the most memorable experiences training with Renzo and John? And how did that start? I mean, how'd you find your way over there?
So it was funny, you know, I was training for 2 years in Miami with Pedro Valente. He had gotten, Pedro Valente is an interesting guy. He still has a big academy down in Miami. When I was there, I mean, this was 20 years ago, he was a young guy in his 20s. He was going to school and he was running his academy out of a warehouse that one of his students owned. And, you know, when I left Miami, you know, Pedro was like a really traditional guy. You know, he was young, he was really traditional. And you know, again, I appreciate everything that he did for me and what he taught us and myself personally. But I remember, you know, it was a gi school. There was no MMA really in that school. It was just a gi school. And when I was going up to New York, and I don't think Pedro ever said this to me personally, but I think people did not, you know, Renzo did not have necessarily a great reputation as a gi technician, because the only thing that people knew about Renzo generally was what they saw in some of the MMA events that were going on back then. And watching those events, if you never trained with Renzo, you wouldn't understand or necessarily have an opportunity to observe like how amazing he is as a technician. And so when I got to New York, I was not necessarily super excited even. I was like, oh, what am I going to learn from Renzo? He's a MMA fighter,
right.
And I don't want to fight. I don't want to be an MMA fighter. And so, and then plus I was in my first year of law school, which is super intense. It's kind of like the most important year it's where you get your first year grades, and those grades will determine in large part where you go, what firm you go to. So I was like super focused on school in that first year. So the only jiu-jitsu I really did, I think I went to Renzo's a couple times when he was at Peggy's Kung Fu Academy. And then there was a club at Columbia that Matt Serra basically ran. Yeah, he was like a purple belt. And so I would go to the jiu-jitsu club, and it was just, undergrads, and I don't think anybody from the law school did it. And, I would go once in a while, and I obviously was not super even, I wasn't focused on it, and I wasn't super impressed with it. I was impressed with Matt Serra. But, it was a good group of people, but like from a jiu-jitsu perspective and just where I was in my life, I was like, man, I don't know. So then I remember there was one guy who I became really good friends with. His name was Jason. And he was at the club, and he got deep into, he's like, when you first get into jiu-jitsu, and there's always a few people who are like, there's people who just like immediately leave. And then there are people who are like totally, they fall under the spell, and they're just, they get the bug. And so Jason was a guy who got the bug, and he started going to Renzo's, and then I remember he just turned into this little monster. And I was like, he started kicking my ass or giving me real problems. And I was like, man, what are you learning over there? So then I was like, I got to go over and start training with these guys. Because my buddy Jason just started getting so good. I was like, I can't fall behind.
Right.
So that's how I got in there. And by the time I started training at Renzo's, he was kind of at the tail end at Peggy's, and then he made his jump, moving the academy over to, there's an academy in Hell's Kitchen that was above, kind of shared a building with a methadone clinic. So you'd have to like climb over the junkies, in the mornings to get in there. And but those were the good old days, back in the Hell's Kitchen Academy. Even before the Blue Basement, there was the Hell's Kitchen Methadone Clinic Academy.
Wow. From training with John, what was your impression of John when you first met him? What was it like?
Well, let me go back. Before I answer that, I want to talk a little bit more about Renzo and about what it's like, what it was like to roll with Renzo.
Okay.
So, when I got there, I mean, you got to put yourself back in like the 2000, right? 1999, 2000. That's when I really started training.
Right.
And, back then, Renzo had already fought in Pride 1 and 2, right? Which was like far and away superior to UFC. I think UFC at that point was like at Native American reservations, like it was getting banned. Like John McCain was like, this is human cockfighting. Right. And all the top fighters from the UFC and around the world were going to Pride. And so Renzo was already a superstar, fighting on Pride with cards with Hickson and Marques and things like that, and people like that. So there was Renzo there, but then I look back, I started thinking about it, and like there was Renzo, there was Ricardo Almeida, there was Matt Serra was like a purple belt, and he would go out to like events in Long Island and fight. Like he was just starting his MMA career. There was Renzo Gracie, who's a guy who I'm not sure that he's still even in the game anymore, but he was a Abu Dhabi medalist. He fought in Pride. There was just, the school was filled with, high level Abu Dhabi competitors, and Renzo, and there was also Hyan was there. I'm trying to think of all the other guys in the early days, but it was kind of like if you turn on the TV one day and you'd never, like, maybe you're from another country, you come to America, you turn on the TV, and there's like a basketball game, like an NBA game. And you're like, oh, I'm fascinated with basketball. You know, this looks like a cool sport. I mean, where can I learn more about this sport? And you start calling around, and then, you know, you call up, like, I don't know, the Chicago Bulls organization. It's like, hey, can I come practice with you guys? And they're like, yeah, sure. And then, you know, there's like Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen, and they're like, yeah, come on, you can, you know, scrimmage with us, and, you know, we'll teach you the finer points. Or, you know, it's, you know, it kind of, I went from learning with guys that were really good and obviously knew a lot more about jiu-jitsu than I did, and were much more committed, to you know, a room where there's just kind of like some of the best guys competing, both, you know, both from a sport perspective and an MMA perspective. And, you know, I'm a regular guy, right? I'm the average Joe who walks in, and, you know, I'm a recreational person, or, you know, athlete, if you will. And I just want to learn some jiu-jitsu. And, you know, rolling with Renzo was like rolling with, like, your dad when you're a little kid, right? I mean, he's not trying to mess you up. He's being, you know, he's giving you a little rough time, just knocking you over, and, you know, giving you pointers here and there. But, you know, like, it's like playing with a puppy, you know, it's, you know, the thing was about Renzo was that he could, you know, adjust his tempo and his intensity to anybody that he rolled with. And he was always, you know, he'd give you a blunt opinion about whatever it was you were doing, you know, whether it was crap or it was good or you were making progress. He's always friendly. He's always helpful. He's like one of the most generous guys in jiu-jitsu that I've ever met. One of the most sincere. There's no pretense about Renzo. And so he's going to give you his honest opinion, and he's going to try to help you. And, you know, he's just like an all around, like I think one of the best instructors I've ever had from a perspective, both technically, because he was doing a lot of things back then that, you know, people don't, I guess they don't know, because they thought of him as just an MMA fighter. Even if he was a very, very good and accomplished MMA fighter. But he did a lot of things, you know, like John, you know, John didn't pull out a lot of things out of thin air. Like, he didn't invent, you know, we all had a foundation. I think John did a great job of systematizing it in a way that I don't know that anybody else could have. But, you know, Ricardo was there, Renzo was there, and they were really technically ahead of the curve, like way ahead of the curve. And rolling with him was like a revelation, right? It was just fun. It was humbling, and you learned a lot, you know, you just appreciated it. Renzo was just an inspiring guy to be around. He really, he made jiu-jitsu challenging and rewarding at the same time. And he kept it fun, even when people were super intense. You know, he's always got a hilarious story, you know, on tap. I mean, he can make, he has a charisma about him that is truly rare, you know, in or out of jiu-jitsu. He's a special guy for sure.
That sounds awesome. Actually, no BS. You sort of remind me of him a little bit in that regard. That description.
Well, thank you. I mean,
I'm saying the thing of like,
not technically, you know, not ability-wise.
Well, I mean, even ability-wise, I mean, to a degree. I mean, I never trained with Renzo, but I've trained with you, and you know, it's like that's how I feel sometimes. Like, we'll roll, and you're not like. It's like you could kick my ass whenever you wanted to, but you don't do that. You know, you play and you open things up, and you know, it's a give and take, and you have good constructive criticism, and it's always a joy to roll with you. So in that regard, that's how I feel. So when I'm hearing you describe him, I'm sort of thinking maybe some of that rubbed off on you.
I mean, it definitely rubbed off on me. And you know, one of the things that I take is this is, you know, you can get into like how the different academies are different, and that, you know, the owner / you know, head instructor of any academy is going to set the tone for the culture of an academy. And Renzo is not a bully. You know, he's not a guy you want to disrespect, or pick a fight with.
Right.
He will fight you.
Yes. We've all heard those stories. Yes.
Yeah, and there's lots you can look at. But but he's not a bully, and he cares. This is the thing. There's so many big teams and people and kind of beefs and breakups in jiu-jitsu.
Mm-hmm.
It's like never ending. Top students leaving, their instructors and all this bad blood that comes up within teams again and again. And the thing, with Renzo is that he has so many of his high level black belts that are still part of the Renzo Gracie family.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because he's just such a generous and really, just a good guy. He takes care of his people. He's not trying to, make money off of people per se. He's not trying to, be greedy like that. He'll give you the shirt off his back. He'll help you if he can, or whenever he can. And he made, look, there's a lot of guys out there that they can't separate their own personal ego, their own need to win,
right?
In whatever it is, from the interests of their students.
Mm-hmm.
And that was never a problem with Renzo. And my job, as I see it, as not just as an academy owner and an instructor, but also as just a higher belt, or a more experienced person, is to help people, and I don't think that you help people necessarily by beating them up all the time. It's not my goal is not to toughen people up and just by beating the hell out of them. My goal is to help them learn jiu-jitsu and keep them in the sport, or keep them in the training room for as long as it is, so they can meet their potential. And, when I think about Renzo, there's schools around where if you're not one of their A-level guys, if you're not one of their, top competitors, they'll take your money and they'll let you take class, and they'll kind of tolerate you a little bit, you're necessary to keep the lights on, but they're not going out of their way to make you feel like you're reaching your fullest potential. And Renzo and the other people at Renzo's, they go out of their way with every student, and they try to help them meet their goals and meet their fullest potential, regardless of whether that happens to be, you're going to be an MMA fighter, or you're going to be a sport jiu-jitsu competitor, much less a champion. And, I think that's a real strength of Renzo's, and across the board with a lot of their, a lot of the guys who are now instructors who have their own schools, is that if Matt Serra is the same way, Tom DeBlas is the same way, Carl Pravik is the same way. These are guys that will help you if you ask them, and they will do their best to make everyone better around them. And that attitude, Renzo obviously attracts that type of student, but that attitude is also self-reinforcing. And so it's something that I think is kind of a thread that runs across the fabric, in the entire Renzo Gracie kind of organization. And, I'm really grateful to be a part of that, where we don't, you don't always see eye to eye with people on everything, but, we all kind of get along, and more than that, we all really help each other out as best we can. And so that's the real strength. And that comes from the top. That comes from Renzo. That's not an accident.
No, it's a pleasure to train at Samurai. The people there are great. I love training with you and Kevin and all the other guys there, and it's a really nice environment. It's very good.
Yeah, I try to keep it that way. It's intentional. I try to keep it with people that are, kind of, again, you attract the type of vibe that you give off.
That you want. Yeah. And of all the people you just mentioned, I've never talked to Tom or Matt, but I have spoken to. I actually interviewed Carl, and Carl's an awesome guy. Yeah, he's a really nice guy. Really cool
is a nice guy. Yeah. Total killer. Killer.
Yeah, he is. He was,
I remember when I first started training, well, not first, but when I first started training with Carl, I remember the first time I ever saw him, I was like, he's a little bit of an older guy back then. And I think he was in his 40s or late 30s, maybe, when I first started. And I remember thinking, I'm going to train with this guy. I don't want to hurt him. He just guillotined me and arm locked me to death. I was like, oh my God, what's happening here? He's such a non-assuming guy.
He is.
And, he's kind of I don't know what the right word is, but he's very unassuming, and he just twisted me up and you know, chewed me up and spit me out. And then from that point on, it kind of became an idol for me, because I was like, you know, he's a little bit old, you know, he's 10 years on me at least.
Yeah.
I was like, man, I wish my jujitsu would be this good when I'm 40. And, you know, and the thing is too, man, I've known Carl for probably over 20 years now. And he's, I mean, as an instructor and as a school owner, like he's reaching so many people, right? I mean, you know, it used to be just Carl, the guy I trained with, you know, at Renzo's, you know, 4 days a week. And now it's like, you know, he's famous Silver Fox. So, you know, he's an amazing guy, and he does help me. I can call him. He's helped me in the past, giving me advice and guidance. And so, he didn't just beat me up all the time, although he was pretty good at that too.
Yeah. He's, he is an idol of mine as well. I have a lot of respect for him. It's just the fact that he's at the age he is, and he has the build he has, and he has like the jiu-jitsu magic. He can just make it happen. You know, it makes it happen.
I can tell you stories about him that, well, maybe offline, because, you know, you have to tell some certain training story.
Right.
His guillotine is legit, and he has caught some old letter names with that guillotine. He is no joke. The guillotine at Renzo's, man, you know, they could just do a guillotine instructional from Renzo's. That's one of Renzo's specialties. And there are multiple guys at Renzo's that have different guillotines, and they're all like just matching. Let me tell you.
Yeah, that's actually a technique that I need to like start focusing on, is the guillotine.
I have like certain guillotines I'm really good at, and then there are other guillotines I'm just terrible. I stopped doing guillotines to too many people, because, you know, what happened is I used to do it all the time, but then I started getting like neck pain a lot on guillotines, and now I feel bad guillotining people too hard.
Oh yeah. You know, I heard John say something similar though about that, because he was talking about Gary Tonin, about his guillotine, and about how he didn't have a good guillotine when he came in, and he would make him train it until he got it. Yeah. And he said that too, that it's like, you know, you have all these different variations of guillotine, and usually people have like one or two that they're good at, and they suck at all the rest of them. And it just depends on, it just depends on whichever one, you know, just resonates with you. You can figure out for whatever reason.
The one thing that you will learn no matter what at Renzo's is how to be good at defending guillotines. Because it is a guillotine-rich environment. You are everybody, you know, there are guillotines aplenty to go around. So if you ever visit, be careful with your neck. But you will get good at defending, because it's just going to be a constant barrage. That's a core technique at Renzo's.
Nice. Can you give us
guillotine?
Can you give us some quick guillotine defense tips?
Keep your head up. Don't curl your head. And you know, another classic one is, you know, keeping your head on the mat. If you're on the bottom, like if you're, you know, cross-side or somebody's on mount, if you look up, you know, sometimes people have a tendency to pick their head up off the floor. You're going to get guillotined. And so you just want to try to keep your ear to the ground, so to speak. And it's going to be hard for the person to encircle your neck. And then the other one is, you know, when you're shooting, don't shoot with your head down. And then if you are going to shoot with your head down, then you better practice Gary Tonin's little counter, because you're going to get guillotined, and it's going to be hard to get out.
Nice. Perfect. So from our offline conversations, I know that when you started at Renzo's, when you started training with John, he was still a blue belt. So this was like the beginning of John's tenure as an instructor. Can you tell us about that? Yeah.
No, I think I met John before I even went into Renzo's Academy. And he was, because there was a guy named Christian that John is friends with, who was I think he was a blue belt at Renzo's, but he was in the Columbia philosophy program with John. And I think Christian is the one who got John into jiu-jitsu.
He's the one who wrestled him in his office?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's what he said, you know. And I remember at some point I met Christian, and he invited me to come train at some Taekwondo academy on the weekend. I think it was a weekend. And, you know, he's like, oh, my friend, John is going to come along. And, you know, this is like philosophy PhD students, right? And I'm like, these guys are all nerds. And, you know, like, okay, whatever, another philosophy friend. And so, you know, this guy walks in, and he's got like long hair, right? And he's like yoked, like he's a big dude. Like John's not tall, but he's like a powerfully built person. And, I turned to Christian. I'm like, when's your friend going to get here? And he's like, oh, no, this is my friend. Oh, okay, great. Okay, he's built. He must work out a little bit. Whatever. He's a nerd. And of course, I say this is fun. I'm a nerd too. I went to grad school too, and I went to law school. So I'm a nerd too. So, we trained in the gi the first time, and John was like a madman. He was probably the strongest guy I had ever been on the mat with. And he just ragdolled me around for, I don't know what it was, 8 or 10 minutes. I'm not even sure if we had a clock on. And, he really didn't have a lot of technique. He just had a gas tank, and he was super strong, and he was bent on destroying me. It was like you fighting for my life. And he wasn't, I'm sure he was not crazy, but he was exceptionally aggressive. And, when you have anybody in jiu-jitsu, when they don't know any technique, but they're like really strong, well, they're going to use their strength. That's their, that's their trump card. I've trained with rock climbers who, they have these crazy grips. So, well, they're going to make crazy grips, and they're never going to let go. And so that's kind of how John was. He just kind of ragdolled me around. And I think I was basically just fighting for my life the whole time with John. And that's kind of how it went for a while. Before he started getting technical, it was just like, all right, you better buckle up, because you're in for a total thrashing.
Nice.
So that was the first, kind of the first iteration or, version of John. And as time went on, and he kind of, he refocused from philosophy, to jiu-jitsu, and he brought, that intellect to bear to jiu-jitsu. He, he just got progressively more and more technical. At some point when he was around a purple belt, he just kind of fixated on certain techniques, and he was so strong, if you were a smaller person without a lot of technique to resist, he'd just pull you into a position and just submit you. He'd do it technically, but there wasn't a lot of subtlety there, right? It was just like, I can grab you and pull you in, or you just go in and he just, heel hook you, or he just guillotine you, or, there wasn't a lot of, I wouldn't go away impressed by like, oh gosh, he's super technical. It'd be like, it's like, fighting with a gorilla who knows how to arm lock you. It's just like resistance. You just got to run away.
Right.
But he wouldn't thrash you at those points. He would just kind of try to pull you, slowly into a position, and then just force you into whatever thing he wanted to do. And then he kept progressing though. That's the thing, is that he just never stopped. He's a real curiosity, a real growth mindset, and he has like an insatiable thirst for like kind of knowledge. And he was interesting. I remember, way back when, in that, back then, jiu-jitsu had a real kind of rivalry with other martial arts like judo or sambo, wrestling, and we were always better. And, that was kind of the premise of the UFCs, was like, jiu-jitsu's the best. And John never really bought into that, because I remember him looking at sambo and doing things with sambo, like wrist locks, and, basically just saying like, yeah, as a system, maybe these things are not, these sports or these forms are not as good as jiu-jitsu, but they each have their strengths. And if, you take the best out of those things and you start to incorporate them. And, that always struck me as a very enlightened perspective, but basically just like, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. They have good things. They know there are certain things they're really good at. They're better than jiu-jitsu. Learn how to use them for our sport. And he was one of the few guys, I think, that was kind of explicit about that, about taking from other, learning and taking from other martial arts and incorporating them into jiu-jitsu.
Right.
Even back when he was a purple or brown belt, that was still something that he focused on a lot.
Yeah, I know he likes taking from wrestling, and he's just, from what I hear, he's just an all around skilled martial artist, striking, everything. I mean, I guess he was GSP striking coach too, wasn't he?
I don't know if he was GSP striking coach, but He, I mean, he's just he's a person who, you know, look, if it doesn't work,
Mm-hmm.
well, okay, we can use it. And
Mm-hmm.
if you look at like even kind of jujitsu's background, you know, with Jigoro Kano,
Mm-hmm.
you know, the inventor of judo. I mean, he basically did the same thing. He said, sure, you know, all of these traditional schools of jujitsu, you know, a lot of it's crap, and you know, you can't. Even some of the stuff is unsafe to do. It's gimmicky, but there's something in each one of these things. And he extracted what he thought at the time would be beneficial to the system he wanted to build. And he, you know, looked at the different principles and he said, well, these principles are kind of the same across these different traditional martial arts. I can take from those, I can extract from them and get the meat of it, you know, leave behind the gimmicks and leave behind the unsafe stuff and leave behind the BS. But each one of these things has a little something. And John, I think, is operating in that same vein. And he was ahead of his time, because now that's like, everyone's like, yeah, of course you need to know how to run. Yeah, judo's awesome. But, you know, no one would argue with you those points. But, you know, 20 years ago, people would be like, why are you wasting your time learning how to double leg? I'm just going to guillotine you, you know? So, you know, he's definitely ahead of his time in that respect. And I don't think he's stopped, really. I mean, I think he's still, and he's, you know, the thing that he did really, it was special with GSP is that, you know, people are obviously doing jiu-jitsu and MMA matches, you know, before John came along with GSP. But what he was really good at was figuring out how to use jiu-jitsu in, you know, in the best possible way within the context of MMA. It wasn't, I'm going to turn GSP into an MMA fighter or into a jiu-jitsu fighter. His role was, I think, as he saw it, was how can I weave jiu-jitsu into GSP's already very formidable skill set as a striker, as a wrestler. You know, as GSP was very successful. I think he had lost to Matt Hughes before he came to Renzo's. I think he thought he had something to learn. He needed he didn't have a lot of jiu-jitsu. Right. Matt Hughes was, I think, a black belt in jiu-jitsu at that point, as well as being a very good wrestler.
Right.
And so, you know, John, I wish, you know, he hasn't come out with this yet, but I wish he would, you know, the whole, like he calls it grapple boxing, where it's like learning how to use grappling within the context of a striking environment. And he was, you know, obviously, I mean, I don't want to take any credit away from GSP, who obviously has to get a lot of the credit for his success in the ring. But, you know, John, that was kind of like his focus in coaching GSP, was not, you know, let's just do jiu-jitsu in an MMA match. Right. That wasn't ever the goal or the result, you know, so.
I remember them when they were just on lecture. I'm going to correct myself too. It wasn't GSP. It was Gary Tonin I was thinking about, that he was a striking coach. I think GSP.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, because GSP actually had Kyokushinkai Karate as his base. Yeah, that's what he had as his striking. And I think John actually credited GSP as creating shootboxing.
Oh, is that right?
Or the idea of it. Yeah, he said the GSP actually created that basically. But I think it's based on what you're talking about, what John did.
But I mean, I think I don't know how they want to give credit to each other, obviously, don't want to shade on anybody. And I don't want to get in the middle of that, you know, and I don't really know, I'm not privy, or was never privy to kind of the relationship between them per se. But whoever influenced who or inspired whoever, you know, did it in the ring, I think, you know, John as a grappling coach, it was interesting, you know, whether GSP was the instigator of that or not, I think John did a good job of complementing GSP's existing skill set, as opposed to trying to replace it or anything like that. Right. And that kind of goes along into some of the things I think that makes John a really good coach, which is that he never really seemed to me to be trying to turn people into his style of grappler. You know, he was always very cognizant that different people have different skills and limitations and goals. He always, as a coach and as a teacher, tried to look for the things, that the techniques or the concepts that would make you better for your game in your body. Not, oh, you have to do it the way I do it. Right. It was like, well, what's your goal? What's the situation you're going to be in? What kind of person are you? What are you doing with this? And then figuring out a way that kind of like unlocks your potential, that so you can make something of it for yourself rather than like, here, I'm going to give you this thing. Right.
No, that makes sense.
That's
He's almost like the Bruce Lee of jiu-jitsu in a sense too, if you think about it. If that whole philosophy is sort of the Jeet Kune Do, Bruce Lee philosophy is use what's
people forget you cannot overstate Bruce Lee's influence on martial arts.
Absolutely.
Bruce Lee, anybody that's like probably 40 or older, I don't know what people are like today. These kids today, they don't know anything. But Bruce Lee was a true visionary, and John is one of our contemporaries. He's about 52.
Yeah,
and he grew up. He knows about. I'm sure Bruce Lee played a huge, kind of in his mind. And Bruce Lee's philosophy about martial arts, it lives on today. I think Bruce Lee would be very pleased if you were able to come back or look down and look at the state of martial arts today. I think it would probably be, a lot more successful and pervasive than what he would have even thought it would have been. Well, he could have envisioned it.
I agree. Yeah. He basically, in my opinion, like if you look at like Jeet Kune Do, it's like he basically invented MMA before it was MMA.
Yeah. I remember reading his book, right? I got that book, and he was talking about grappling. He was talking about Judo Gene LaBelle and about how Judo Gene LaBelle kicked his ass in training. He was like, I gotta learn how to grapple.
Right.
Like that was, I remember reading that and being like, I gotta learn how to grapple. Bruce Lee said he's gotta learn how to grapple, and some judo guy beat him up. I'm gonna have to learn some judo. Where can I learn some jiu-jitsu?
Right.
Right. So yeah, I think Bruce Lee, Jigoro Kano, I think in the striking arts, I think I don't know a lot about striking arts and karate, but I'm sure each of those guys, each of those founders or inventors of those schools shared a very similar idea of, you need to take what you can from what you can get, and incorporate into what you're trying to do.
Yeah. I have a background in karate. That's where I started. And I know that like basically Funakoshi is like the equivalent of Kano in karate. Like Kano is the judo. He's basically like, he didn't create karate, but he created Shotokan karate, or that was the name of his school. And he developed it into like more of a mass practiced, form that ended up in elementary schools and then went on to adults and so forth in Japan. But yeah, he's like, I would say Funakoshi is like the guy who like really put it on the map as far as world.
Yeah. I think what's also interesting is, I know for Kano, judo was not just for judo's sake. He thought of judo as a way of preserving some of the good parts of Japanese culture that were being lost at that time. And he thought of it as a way of preserving or encouraging, character and virtues that were valued in Japanese society. And so he thought of it as, good way to learn and preserve an important part of Japanese history and culture. It's going to improve the character and the health of its practitioners. And then those people, this is the third level, is those people are going to go back and they're going to contribute to the society that they're a part of, or the community that they're a part of. And, there's that kind of that educator role and an awareness of, the role of sport and martial arts in society and how it can be a positive and a benefit to everybody, not just the practitioners, but also the people that are, that are part of the community, that incorporates the practitioners or includes the practitioners.
No, I agree. Yeah, absolutely. How's jiu-jitsu different today than it was when you started training?
It's like we were all fumbling around. At least I was fumbling around in the dark. It's just, jiu-jitsu is, it's hard to overstate how far it's come. When I started jiu-jitsu, you had, 5 or 6 positions, basically, you had a closed guard. If you didn't have a closed guard, then your guard was getting passed. There was no, I mean, there was a half guard, right? With Gordo. That was a little bit afterwards. And that was like, half guard, what? You mean it's not over? You know, it's either you got a closed guard or you're trying to put the guy back in the closed guard. Right. You know, I remember seeing a back take at one point that like today is like you teach to the kids class in the first day. But at the time I was like, this is like magic, you know? It's jiu-jitsu's changed in terms of, you know, the multiplicity of positions and submissions. It's obviously changed in, you know, it used to be kind of like a fighting thing. You know, people went to jiu-jitsu to learn how to fight. It wasn't even so much self-defense. It was just like, how do I fight? Right. Now it's, you know, there's sport jiu-jitsu. That's become, I think, the preeminent. You know, it used to be MMA was a big thing. And now, you know, if you want to do MMA, I'm not sure that everyone goes to a jiu-jitsu school. You know, there's a lot of MMA camps out there. If you want to be a fighter, you just go start going to an MMA school, which will have jiu-jitsu in it. Right. But, you know, there's been kind of a division. It used to be, you know, there's a jiu-jitsu school like Renzo's, right? In 2000, 22 years ago, and earlier, you know, if you wanted, you know, I'd go to that school. If you wanted to be an MMA fighter, if you wanted to learn how to fight, if you wanted to be a sport jiu-jitsu champion, gi and no gi, Renzo's had it all. That's where you went. And they had world champions in each one of those disciplines, right? What gi, no gi, and MMA. And now it's like, you know, you have a school that's gi focused. You have schools that are self-defense focused. You have schools that are just, you know, MMA focused. There's been this kind of division. I think it's, and that contributes to kind of all the blossoming of techniques that we see now. You know, jiu-jitsu from a technical perspective, I think is light years ahead of where it used to be. Obviously there's a lot more people who are participating and learning and competing in jiu-jitsu. There's a lot more money in jiu-jitsu. I don't know, probably in MMA as well. There's more practitioners. There's more kids, there's more women. It's more of a family thing now. It used to be, you would not want to bring your kids to a jiu-jitsu school. Now the kids that run the schools, you know, they're the key money makers and, you know, the big growth factor for jiu-jitsu as a business and as a sport. You know, you just have an information explosion with the internet and with video. You know, now also, you know, it used to be when, you know, you were a part of a school and you didn't go to any other schools because you went to another school I mean, it was on, right? Like, if someone came from another academy and you didn't know who they were and nobody was, I mean, that was like, you're going to have a fight. You had to be careful, you know, you just didn't wander in. If I went to I remember at one point, you know, I was in San Francisco and I wanted to come train at House. Like, Renzo, can you make a phone call? You know, I don't want to just wander in there because, you know, this is back in the day when they had some, you know, you don't want to make Cameron Earl mad at you or Burke, David Campbell. Or you Kurt Osiak. You know, like those guys would tear you limb from limb. But nowadays, you know, it's like no big deal if you go to another academy. Most places they're like, they'll just put you on video, right? It's like, okay, whatever. I mean, I remember it was really hard to learn jiu-jitsu outside of your own academy. The tapes were, you know, you'd get videotapes. You couldn't see events. Most of the time you had videotapes you had to buy or DVDs eventually. Now you could watch the worlds in real time. Maybe the stream's a little dodgy, but you know, there's just so much information that, you know, you can watch kind of the development of jiu-jitsu almost in real time. You know, people are videotaping their training sessions. So, you know, if you want to go see what Craig Jones is doing today, there's probably a video of Craig Jones training today. In fact, I know there is because I watched one.
I watched him trip Keenan the other day on his ass.
You know,
he's like, "Oh, you're gonna break his leg."
I mean, it's amazing to think that now you can have a window into almost any high level academy with any high level instructor. You know, you want to look. I'm in New York. Do I want to go see what Andre Galvao is teaching? Okay, you know, I just join, you know, Atos.com or whatever. Do I want to watch I don't know, somebody in Brazil. You could probably stream almost anything at this point.
Right.
And, you know, now if you want to learn how Marcelo does what he does, I mean, there's 800 videos on Marcelo's mginaction.com.
Right.
You know, that is just,
There's 8,000 instructionals on BJJ Fanatics.
Yeah. I mean, anybody can make it, and anybody can share what they do, and people do. And, you know, it used to be 15 years ago, you'd be like, oh, you can't learn anything off the internet. I mean, you can learn a lot of really good jiu-jitsu off the internet now. It's for free off of YouTube. It's not even, it's not in dispute, you know, it's just, this is why the sport is, I think, advancing so quickly. You know, it's just, it's scary to think like what it's gone, even in the last, it seems like it's accelerating too.
Right.
So,
I mean, even like, these young kids are just like beasts, you know, they
well, now you have
all this stuff.
15 and 16-year-old kids who are winning trials. It's no longer, you know what, it's normal now. And you know, it reminds me of, if you look at other sports now, like football and basketball is a little different, but because of the pro leagues and because of college, right? College has this, and the pros, they don't want to have kids that are too young making millions and millions of dollars right away. But you know, like LeBron James was like, everyone knew he was going to be an NBA star when he was 15 years old. You know, Kobe Bryant, same thing. You know, when you look at like Olympic level sports, everyone knows who the top, you know, junior Olympians are, who are going to come in and start winning Olympics and world championships. If you watch US wrestling, there's a crop of young guys who, they're still in college and they're killing it, you know, even against old, you know, experienced senior athletes. And jiu-jitsu is the same way. You know, you have the Kolobach and you have the Rotolo twins, and you have, you know, Nicky Ryan now is no longer the teen phenom, you know, it's, you know, Cobrinha Jr. I think you know, it's like these kids, they turn 18 and they're winning world championships, and there's a lot of them. It's not a couple, you know, and they're winning Abu Dhabi trials, like submitting everybody. It's, you know, Micah Galvao. I mean, it's just, you know, it's funny. I used to think when I was, and I see other people who thought this too over the years, which was, you know, hey, I'm going to work hard. I'm going to go up the ranks. I'm going to get my black belt. And even though I'm, you know, 27 or 25, when I'm a black belt, I'm going to kick everyone's ass because I'm a black belt. And you think, you know, that's going to happen. And what has really happened is you work really hard, and you get better, and you're 27 or whatever, 22. And there's some 15-year-old kid who's already 10 times better than you'll ever be your whole jiu-jitsu career.
Right.
You know? And I remember, you know, when I went to Brazil in 2001, I trained at Gracie Barra, and there were like these two kids that were like green belts, and I couldn't sweep them. You know, I was just a blue belt, or I may have been a purple belt, but I couldn't move them. I mean, and these kids, if you put them cross-side on top of me, they couldn't submit me, but if I tried to get out, if I tried to put, they would submit me. And now you wonder why all the people from Brazil are so good. It's because they're all training when they're 4, you know, start training when they're 6, with world champions. And now that's everywhere. You know, if you're a kid and you want to work hard, you can go and train with like the best, and you're going to get really good, and you're going to be a world champion. If you go train with the Mendes brothers or you know, whomever, you know, Andre Galvao, you know, if you're 10 and you keep doing it, when you're 18, you're probably going to be in the running, if not the world champion.
Yeah, you know? You do a little homeschooling thrown in, and
it's crazy. These kids, man, and they don't care, man. I mean, I remember seeing one of the Rotolo twins again. Remember the match with Wagner Hocha? I don't know if you ever saw that, fight to win, and I was like, man, I hope Wagner Hocha doesn't like beat him up too bad. He's just a kid, you know, whatever.
Smashed.
Smashed. I mean, it was not even close. And, you know, Wagner, you know, went from being like a big bully and just crushing everybody to basically getting beat up in that match.
Right.
Like, all right.
Yeah. I mean, they're young, and they're supple, and they're strong, and they're being homeschooled probably most of the time, and all they're really doing is training and playing video games and sleeping and eating a lot. Yeah.
Just to remember, the lesson is to anyone, you know, anybody who's a little bit older, like in your 20s or 30s, and you're rolling with that, you know, 12-year-old kid, 14-year-old kid,
Mm-hmm.
Be nice to him. Be nice to him, because in 5 years, that kid's going to come back and he's going to wreck you.
Yep.
It may not
Yep.
even take that long.
It may not. Yeah. I mean, it's just.
I'm telling you, I have some like 13, 14-year-old kids in my kids' classes.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, man.
I rolled with one of them.
Oh, yeah. Who'd you roll with?
What was his name? Is it tall
Yuri?
kid?
Was it Yuri?
Yuri. Yeah, Yuri. I rolled with him a couple
He's a
times.
good kid, yeah.
He's pretty good. Yeah. Yeah.
He's good. He's super smart too.
Yeah, he is.
He's not going to be a jiu-jitsu world champion. He's smart, right? So he's really good in school. He's going to be a scientist. But yeah, he's a good example of like, just, man, these kids, they just get so good so fast.
They pick it up so fast. Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
They do. It's like, I don't know. I mean, I started when I was like, 42 or something. So I was like, I'll just do the best I can.
I actually think it's better that you start later. And I'll tell you why.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you're older, you can see the benefits of jiu-jitsu that go beyond just the success or failure on the mat.
Yes.
And so you can really, when you're older, you got to appreciate, they say the youth is wasted on the young.
Mm-hmm.
When you're an older person, I think you see the value of what you're doing in more ways than just, whether you're getting tapped or whether you're tapping someone else or whether you win a match at a tournament. Jiu-jitsu is much, much deeper than those, which are great. I'm not diminishing or taking anything away from the efforts and the hard work and the successes and the sacrifices of the athletes who, do what they have to do in order to win. But I think you see the value of what we're doing at a much more easily when you're a little bit older and you have a little more experience and you can kind of understand, you're more mature of what's going on.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I get a lot out of it, besides all those, the obvious things you just stated, but the whole thing of just being able to humble myself and to keep, and actually it makes you stronger mentally as well. Just the ability to deal with the torture and the punishment of it. And just keep going and don't give up. And, it just makes you, there's a lot of attributes to jiu-jitsu. I always say it's like, jiu-jitsu is like life. You don't give up, and hopefully you don't give up on it.
Yep.
Some days are good, some days are bad, but you don't give up.
Yep.
And that's the thing. It's just the ability to keep going back no matter what, and keep going forward. Yeah.
Perseverance.
Very important. Yeah. Perseverance is very important. Here's a training type question. Not really a training question, but just like philosophy. Do you have different strategies for gi and no gi? And basically, what do you feel the differences between the two? Some people think they're totally different.
Well, so, when I was at Renzo's and I was training with John, I started gi. And then when I got to Renzo's, I basically just started doing mostly, I'd say 90% no gi. But that, I would still train in the gi, but just not as much. And for me, I tried to develop a game that would work in both, whether it was gi or no gi, because there's certain things in gi that you can do. You can do spider, you can do lasso. You can get really good at, there's some people who are just amazing with collar chokes. There's a lot of, the gripping and is totally different in gi. Or it can be, and so I don't have really big, strong hands. I'm not like a big, I don't have that grip strength. So, I tried as best as I could to build a game for myself that would work in the gi or out of the gi. I think in the gi, you have to be a lot more cautious and aware of your positioning because, that if your collar's in reach, you're in danger. And once you lose, once your elbow gets passed over because of the gripping, sometimes you can't get it back, right? That's it. So, in no gi, you're a lot more slippery. The game is more fluid. There's more movement. In gi, you make a mistake and that could be it. You lose the position.
Yeah.
You're not going to get it back unless the other person makes kind of a big mistake or something along those lines. So they can be very different. You can build a game, it's like lapel guard, in a gi, you can obviously literally tie the person up with their own lapels or your lapels. And, your grip strength can play a huge role in that. You can really just kind of hold on to the person and glue yourself to them. much more effectively than you can in a no-gi situation.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, they can be very different, but you can develop a game that where you don't have to, you can do both. But, you know, it's one of those things where if you're doing kind of both, you're kind of, if you build a game that's where you can use no-gi grips in the gi, well, then you're losing out a little bit in the gi. You're not going to be as good as the gi. And you see this today, right? Like guys specialize now and they can't, it used to be, look, I mean, what's the event? Are we fighting? Is it MMA match? Is it a gi match? Is it a no-gi match? What is it? You know, like Hoist at one point, I remember Valij Ismail, you know, challenged Hoist to a match. Right? I don't know if you remember this. It's on YouTube. You can watch it. But, you know, Valij challenged Hoist to a match. This was after Hoist had been in the UFC, won the UFC. Valij is like, Hoist sucks. Let's have a jiu-jitsu match. And like Hoist was like, all right, let's do it. And they had a big jiu-jitsu match. You know, and now people are hyper specializing. They're doing, look, I want to go to Abu Dhabi. I'm just doing no gi. I'm going to learn wrestling. That's it. And would they also kick your ass in a gi? Probably. But, you know, like you see like Kolobach. I mean, he's a no gi guy. Is he good at gi? Yes. But he's not like Tanya Dalpra on the other hand, or Honatis, who am I thinking of? The other AOJ kid who just won Worlds. You know, they're two guys, but they're gi specialists. You don't see them in no. Are they there? I'm sure they're really good in the gi, no gi, but they're not. They're focusing on their gi games and their gi on gi events. You know,
Gordon Ryan, same
guys,
thing.
Gordon Ryan, you know, like he'll put on a gi and he'll kick 99%. If you're not a world champion in the gi, he'll probably kick your ass. You know, he's good at jiu-jitsu. Right. There is crossover, obviously, but you know, if you want to succeed at the highest levels, it seems like these guys are all specializing. So I mean, I think it all comes down to what your goal is. You know, just because Gordon Ryan's specializing in Abu Dhabi rules, no gi, doesn't mean that everyone else should either. I mean, there's a lot to be said for learning how to do jiu-jitsu in the gi. There's a lot to be said to learn how to do self-defense, gi and no gi. You know, what's your goal? What do you want to be good at? You know, jiu-jitsu is, there's not, I think I'm going to paraphrase Carlinhos Gracie, but he says, you know, there's only one jiu-jitsu, you know, and it's obviously there's many different types of jiu-jitsu, but it's all jiu-jitsu at the end of the day. Yeah. So what are you going to do with it? It's a tool. So how do you want to use it?
Yeah. So that's good. I like that. I mean, I personally, Vegas is newer to me now. I like the no-gi better, but I prefer the no-gi, but I still, obviously, as you know, I train gi still. But I just said that, I don't know, my body feels better at the no-gi, to tell you the truth.
Yeah. It depends on who you're training with, right? Because with the gi, you know, you can slow things down, I think, a lot more effectively or easily. With no-gi, you know, you don't get as much tension of people either holding you or you trying to get away. You're not going to get choked the way that you're not going to get face choked the way that you would in a gi.
Yeah, right.
But, you know, sometimes guys are flying around no gi, and if they're not careful, like you said, there, you know, you were talking offline, I think, before we started. You know, guy jumps over your guard and lands with his, you know, like knees you in the face, or drops his hip on your arm or something like that. Like, those are rarer in the gi, I think. Those kinds
absolutely,
because you can hold on to a person. They don't have the freedom of movement that they have without the gi.
Right, and I think the gi actually gives an advantage to older gentlemen such as ourselves. We can't slow down the young guys a little bit. So that does play a role. It's So what are some of your favorite training methods? Do you prefer free rolling, drilling, flow rolling, or situational sparring?
Yes.
All of the above.
I mean, I think they all have their places. I think, you know, you have a limited amount of time in your day, and depending on where you are, there's no real, like when you're a recreational athlete, you know, you have a limited number. I mean, everyone has a limited number of hours in the day. And, but you know, when you have a job, you have a family, you have other commitments, you gotta pick what you're going to do and how you feel. And so some days, I want to roll hard. Other days I'm like, okay, I rolled hard yesterday. I don't want to roll that hard. And so you roll a little bit lighter. it's interesting. I like to I'm always curious about how people train, like how sport jiu-jitsu athletes, how professional athletes train in jiu-jitsu. And there's a variety of, there's no one way, right? There's a lot of different athletes who,
Right.
Different stages of their careers. They have different, obviously, capacities, workloads. But you see, I think it's very common for sport, like professional sport athletes, to break up their training sessions. They don't just have hard training sessions all the time, contrary to popular belief. Some might. I'm sure there are instances where guys just train Pahada every day, but and maybe they do Pahada every day, but it's not Pahada all day. So there are a lot of guys who they might do a drilling session, they may have a light rolling session, they may have a more technical session sometimes, and then they're going to have a hard session. Everybody's different, I think, and depending on how I feel, like I have I pulled my neck the other day, so like now I'm more flow. I'm into more flow rolling.
Right. If
I'm really injured and I can't move, then that's the only thing I can do.
Right.
Sometimes I like to play super defensive. I just go in and I let the person work, and I try to just see if I can defend. It's kind of like, how do I feel that day? And and you just need to have training partners who can appreciate that you don't need to have a super hard roll every time you're on the mat with every partner, and within a hard rolling session. Sometimes you need to take a rest roll.
Right.
When I was going back to like John and Renzo and the higher level guys at Renzo's, often they would let me get into it. Like when we started, they would just let me take their back, or they would, be in a position where I started cross-side or whatever it was, to create some sort of like challenge or for themselves, or give me an opportunity to work a position that maybe I would normally never get on them.
Right.
And, and I try to do that too, where I let people start in cross-side or on my back. Because, this is a big downfall for a lot of people. I think you get to a point in your skill or in your career where not that many people can take advantage of you, right? If you don't want to give up your back, they're not going to get on your back. They're not going to. If you don't let them pass, they'll never pass. But what happens is when you become that good in your gym, you're like the big fish in the little pond. And what happens is eventually you run into somebody who is good enough to take your back, and you don't have the practice, right? I don't have my back in a long time. Right. And you see this often where guys are alpha, competitors, and you're like, oh man, this guy's amazing. And then they seem to crumble as soon as somebody gets a good position on them.
Right.
Hadra Gracie was also a big inspiration, because he often talks about how he lets people work from, bad positions. And he's one of the best guys who's able to like give up a bad position and then turn it into gold, and literally gold. So, I think it's beneficial to let other people work, put yourself in bad positions. You don't have to go hard all the time. It's funny. I have people who ask me, oh, I want to just roll hard. I'm like, that's how I'm going to get better. It's not how. Yes, it is. You need to do that. But the wear and tear of training hard all the time is going to catch up to you eventually. You're going to you're going to get burned out. And also you're not getting better just from hard rolling all the time, or even most of the time, So I mean, maybe some people are. I shouldn't say never and always, but I think for the majority of people, it's good to kind of mix up your training sessions. You should be drilling. I think drilling is one of those things that for most recreational practitioners is something nobody really wants to do.
Right.
And I think people wonder, like, why are these guys so good? Like when they watch the Rotolo twins, right? Who seem like, when you, at first glance, if you watch them, it looks like they're just going crazy. They're super technical. I mean, it's obvious they have spent a lot of time in the gym drilling, because the way that they move, it doesn't seem like it's super precise, but they are catching the highest level competitors. And you don't do that by accident. It's not like you just kind of spaz out and fall into a, dominant position and finish everybody.
Yeah.
Those guys, they drill and they drill and they drill until it doesn't look like they're doing much
Mm-hmm.
on purpose. But they, all of those guys, high level, I would say almost all of them are drilling as much or more than they are rolling hard in competitive roles.
I believe that. I believe that 100,000%.
Yeah.
I mean, I love the dream.
Recreational athletes don't want to hear that.
No, I know they don't. Everybody wants to go. Everybody wants to be blood sport every day, every role, and it's like personally, I would rather. I mean, I want to do like maybe 2 hard days a week where I roll hard 2 days a week, and the rest other days I would love it if I could find more people who would drill and flow roll and and work certain positions and things like that than just always trying to like take my head off. But that's just that's the way it is a lot of times. I just have to I think I have to work with some of the guys and cultivate some of that. I mean, I've already talked to some and they're like, okay with doing those sort of things, like more flow rolling and so forth. And I want to do more drilling. But I also think for my longevity in the sport, I have to like take control of that for myself and just say, hey, look, this is what I'm going to do today. Actually, there was one day when my knee was bothering me last month. There was a day where I was in there, and I actually was the rest roll or the rest round. So when people were rolling hard and didn't want to roll hard, I let them come over to me and I drill with them, or work a position with them, or just something like that. So I still continue to get training, on top of the reps I already got doing the Ashigurami stuff we were working, and it was a great training session for me. And I was like, I got to do that more often. Just do it, even when I'm healthy.
Well, I think, on that point, I always feel like whenever I've had a significant injury, whether it's a neck or a knee, or my hip now, arm, it's always been an opportunity to work on some other part of my game.
Right.
And, there was a great example of a guy who was a black belt who used to be kind of the advisor of Stanford's grappling program.
Oh yeah.
He had like back surgery. He told me the story how he had back surgery and he couldn't do anything. And so other than just lay there. And so he said he'd go in to train. He's like, the only thing I can do is defend the mount. All I can do is like defend chokes and arm locks. That's it. I just have to lay here. And so he said that's all he did for like 2 years or a year and a half or something. He's like, all I did was just let people mount me. And then I was like, okay, submit me. And as you can imagine, he got really, really good defense from the mount. And I think that can be, a lot of people, they get injured and they disappear.
Yeah.
And it's a real motivational problem, because what happens is you get injured, you take a break, you come back, and the guys that you were either equal to or better than are all now much better than you are. Or have to actually kind of rehab your jiu-jitsu because you haven't been training. You have to rehab physically. You have to get ready, get up to speed again. And then you're like totally demoralized. You're like, oh man, I suck at jiu-jitsu. These guys are kicking my ass. That blue belt or white belt that I used to kick his ass, he's now kicking my ass.
Right.
And their jiu-jitsu is not that good. So instead of doing that, what you should do if you're injured is go to the academy and do what you can. If it's just watching, then just watch. If it's just drilling lightly, then drill lightly. If it's just defending some position, then just go do that. That you will maintain and you'll get better at something. And honestly, I remember, I'll tell you this story real quick. When I was at Renzo's, there was a period of time that I had a lot of anxiety about going into the school. Because I just, every match was like a war that I had. And, I was just like, I don't know. I just was consumed with this anxiety of like, losing, like guys passing my guard, and I would fight to the death to have, to keep my guard intact. And then they'd pass and I'd be exhausted. And then I'd be like in this like existential crisis, and they pass my guard and I'd be like, I feel like I'm going to die. I'm exhausted. And, at some point I just kind of stopped myself and I was like, well, what am I doing here? If I don't enjoy this, why am I doing jiu-jitsu? I'm like sick to my stomach, before I go in. And I'm like, it's not this, eventually I got to the conclusion, it's not the school. It's not anybody in the school. It's me. I'm the problem, right? My mindset is the problem. I'm going in there trying to do something that, given the level of the competitors and competition at the gym, is just not a realistic goal. right? It's not realistic at Renzo's to think you're going to keep everyone in your guard.
Right.
It's not realistic to think you're going to submit everybody. It's not really, you know, like there's a lot of really, really good guys.
Yeah.
And so I started thinking like, well, what's the worst that's going to happen?
Mm-hmm.
What's the worst that's going to happen if they
get
pass
tapped?
Yeah, maybe. But like, even before the tap, let's say, you know, I let somebody passes my guard. If like, okay, well, can they submit me? Like, is this the end of the roll? Well, if I go as hard as I possibly can, well, it might be the end because I'm going to be exhausted and probably out of position.
Right.
When the person does pass. So what I did is I started just letting people pass my guard. This is like, all right, I'm just going to let you pass my guard. What are you going to do to me from here? Because you think, like, usually we have this big war over the guard.
Right.
That's like jiu-jitsu. It's like 5% of jiu-jitsu is getting past the other person's guard. And okay, well, I'm just going to like get rid of that. Right. Okay. Now what are we going to do? I'm fresh now. What are you going to do? And then I just focused on like, well, how do I recover? What can I do from here? You know, what are my options here?
Right.
And because that, you know, that's a lot of, you know, whether you're playing guard or you're passing guard, the majority of people see that as like, well, once I pass or once I sweep, now I'm in charge. Now I've won because you're going to be tired and out of position. But if you just take that out of the equation and you say, okay, well, all right, well, go ahead and mount me. What's the worst you're going to do?
Right.
You know, and then you get better at that. And then after that, then your guard gets better because you're not as like paranoid about the guy passing your guard.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So I think that all ties into if you're going to get injured or even just how are you looking at your training sessions? You know, you can do things that don't require you to go balls to the wall and still get really good at jiu-jitsu. At different levels. So I remember, you know, when going back to like when John and Renzo would let me start cross side, being like, all right, look, this was the whole thing, you know, they just were giving me trouble because you know, I'm not that good at passing guard, but now I've got their back, you know, this is going to be easy. You know, go ahead. Yeah. Go take John's back and see what happens. Or
see what happens. Yeah.
See how easy it is, you know, good luck. They didn't seem to have any trouble.
Yeah.
You know, they were not worried about me being on their back. And so, but that's a function of having a lot of people on their back for a long time and really good people. You know, you get really good and you get confident and then your jiu-jitsu gets better.
Yeah, it's true. It's all true. All absolutely true. And I'll actually, even though I can't probably train very much, I'm still going to be in class tomorrow morning.
Come in and, you know, have somebody start on your back or something. I don't know. Get choked up a bunch of times.
Yeah, I'll figure it out on Saturday morning. I'll come in too. I'll just do gi on Saturday morning. I'll figure out what I can do and I'll do that. I mean, it's, got to get it done. Got to be there. So
you're not going to get better by not being there.
No. What are you going to do? Just sit at home and watch cartoons or something? I mean,
you know.
Yeah, I'll be there. So what is the most important thing? We actually sort of touched on this earlier, but what's the most important thing that jiu-jitsu has taught you?
This is like the eternal question. I think jiu-jitsu, I mean, if I generalized it the most, like the broadest, I would say that jiu-jitsu has helped me learn how to minimize or mitigate the negative effects of things that I cannot control. And ideally to benefit or maximize the benefits of the things I cannot control. I think those things can go together. And I mean, that's on the mat. It's in your personal life. It's in your professional life. You know, there's other people. You can't control other people.
No.
You can't always control yourself, right? You can't always control the feelings, right? The anxiety is like a good example. Sometimes you can't, like, I still get anxiety, but the way I look at it, and I remember I had a very similar feeling, you know, when I practiced law, or even tests, you know, even when I did all like the bar and, you know, the LSAT and whatever, all the other tests I had to do. I knew I was going to be anxious, but the anxiety, I learned how to recognize and appreciate that anxiety for what it was, which was kind of an arousal of my emotional state in preparation for a stressful situation.
Nice.
And I learned if I'm not anxious, I don't perform as well. The anxiety is a good thing. You know, it means that you are priming, you're mentally your body and your brain are mentally priming you for battle, so to speak, right? For a really stressful situation. And, you know, you can worry about your anxiety. You can worry about your worry, or you can recognize it for what it is, which is like, you're getting pumped, like, you know, like, and it's a good thing that it's there. And so like nowadays, if I go into like what should be a stressful situation and I'm not anxious, that's a bad sign. Right. So if I show up at a, you know, I've had this before, like I've shown up at tournaments and like, sometimes I'm like super wired and I'm like, oh man, I'm dead. And then, but I do well. And then other times I show up at tournaments and I'm like, oh, I'm so calm. And I get murdered in the first round, you know?
Yeah. I've had that experience.
Yeah. It's, you know, the anxiety, I think of the anxiety as my friend, you know, as an asset, but you got to look at those negative things that may seem like negatives and say, well, what can I either minimize, mitigate, or take advantage of? And that should be like on the mat, personal life, professional life. So, you know, yeah, you can't control the events around you. Oh, you can't control coronavirus, right? Like, no, you know, so what do you can't wear like the mask. I remember the mask, everyone hates the mask. But, you know, go train in the mask a little bit. Go train in the mask. Your cardio will get better.
Yeah, well, yeah, well.
You will learn, like, you know, one of the big things about, you ask about the gi and no gi. So in the gi, you get smothered sometimes. The gi gets over your face and you can't breathe, or it could be your own gi. And, you know, but that's the mask right there. So if you can handle the mask, it's like, you know, there actually is this device. I don't know if people still use it, but a couple of years ago, there was the training mask. It was like a mask.
Yeah, the high altitude mask.
And it was like, it would restrict your airflow.
Yeah.
You know, those things cost like $100 back in the day. And you can now, everyone's got the mask, you know, you can just, you know, you can just, here, I got one in my pocket. There we go. That was like $2, you know, it has the same effect. It just comes off a little easier as those old training masks.
Yeah. Well, as you know, I have trained in a mask a few times and it's not pleasurable.
It sucks. But you know what? I mean, embrace the suck, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's what I looked at it like when I tried it a couple of times. I looked like, if anything else, is get my cardio better or teach me how to breathe better, you know, while I'm rolling. So.
And you know who doesn't care about the mask? The kids. The kids don't care about the masks.
No, they don't care, and they wear them all the time, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they actually lifted the mandate, didn't they? Lift it like yesterday?
I think they did. That's what
in the county. Yeah, I think they lifted it. I think it's over. Yeah. Well, regardless, yeah. But that's awesome. Yeah, I think those are some of the same things that I've experienced or how I think about it. And I think your take on the anxiety is awesome. And I still get anxiety to this day, just going into the academy to train all the time. I mean, you know,
all the time. I mean, going to work. I mean, I get anxiety when I'm like, I remember as a lawyer, I'd have to like call up opposing counsel. What a nightmare. You know, you have to, these people are often very disagreeable. They're getting paid big bucks to, you know, F with you and make your life miserable on behalf of their client. And, you know, and it's a high pressure environment and, you know, you got to deal with it, man. And I think, I tell you what, jiu-jitsu gives you a confidence when you go in, you know, you go in every day, you get your ass beat, it teaches you humility. But, you know, if you absorb those lessons beyond just, you know, the technical stuff, it will equip you to deal with high pressure situations in your life.
It's absolutely true. Yeah. I use it in my job and
I've had many instances where people have been taken aback by how calm I can be. Right. And in the face of, you know, like I had a guy once, it was so funny. I was at a deposition. There was this guy, he was kind of a big guy, and he was getting pissed off because I was asking his client all sorts of questions that were not good for his case.
Right.
Got all mad at me, and he like stood up and he slammed the table and he got like physically threatening. I just looked at him and I was like, I did not get upset. You know, there were other lawyers. They were all like, "Oh my God, what's this guy gonna do?" And I was like, I just looked at him. I was like, "Do you need a minute, man? I mean, you know, you're on videotape acting like a maniac.
Yeah.
Are you okay, man? Do you need a minute to, you know, pull yourself together?" You know, and I said it like in that, and I just like watched him. I let him do the whole thing, his whole little tirade, and then I gave him that little like, "Hey, man, it's okay. You can." And he was totally taken aback because he's used to either intimidating or provoking, you know, some like violent or fearful reaction. And, you know, if you can remain calm in the face of that type of stuff, that's a lot of times keeping your composure in
Mhm.
just general in life is the key to success,
Yes.
especially in high pressure situations. If you fall apart and rise to the bait, you take that
Mhm.
bait, or
Mhm.
you get, I mean, I could have been like, hey man, let's go outside and fight. Well then, that wouldn't have
Yep.
been good. That's what he wanted.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. I deal with, in what I do for a living, there's a lot of, it's not a physical threat, but there is always, it's having to not argue, but debate legal type issues with people. I'm not an attorney, obviously, but I have to work with a lot of attorneys,
That's too bad. I feel bad for you.
and I deal with, and I deal with a lot of
My
civil code.
condolences.
Yes, I deal with a lot of civil code and
Oh
and,
man.
and restrictions every day, and
Yeah.
and people want to challenge you on everything, and they're argumentative, and it's the
Yep.
same thing, and
Very
it's,
disagreeable.
yes, jiu-jitsu has been very useful for me in that regard.
Yeah.
And I even actually, I was recently in a deposition,
Oh, that's too
as a
bad. Were you
witness.
being
Yeah.
deposed?
Yes,
Oh,
yes, for 8 hours. 8 hours.
it's awful, right?
It's awful. Yeah. So
I loved it. I love being in the room for 8 hours, getting to
yeah.
pepper the witness with questions.
Yes, yes, it's awesome, man. It was great, but yeah, it was a long day, but yeah, same thing. I just kept calm and just did what I had to do. No big deal.
I used to do this little trick in depositions where,
Mhm.
if I could, I would have I'd do some research on the witness, and I would
Mhm.
try to find, kind of embarrassing things about them, right?
Mhm.
To
Mhm.
ask them about.
Mhm.
And every time, whenever the witness would give me kind of run, because witness, you guys can be cute, right? Like,
Right.
you don't answer the question, the
Mhm.
lawyer of
Mhm.
GX, you
Mhm.
get the
Mhm.
smart
Mhm.
ass. So then I would always have this card in my pocket, and I would like
Mhm.
pull it out, and I would ask a
Mhm.
question that I knew would make the witness really uncomfortable, and that you
Mhm.
had to answer,
Right.
right? And of course, then the witness would either be embarrassed or upset or whatever.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And then I would go back to my original line of questioning, right? And then I'd be
Wow.
like, I'd ask you the question again. And then
Mhm.
if you were all upset and whatever,
Right. Right.
then, you'd be talking. And that was the whole key, is to get the witness to talk, and
Right.
especially beyond whatever they were prepared to talk. And then I'd put and then if we came back and then you still wanted to push, I'd pull out the card again, and I'd ask the next
Mhm.
question. They'd never let them see how many questions I'd have, because I might only have one, but I'd
Right.
pull, I'd write some other things down there too, just whatever. And
Wow.
I would try to get the witness upset. And then the other key was, you ask them questions right before lunch and right after lunch,
Uh-huh.
because they're either hungry or they're sleepy,
Right.
so they'll either be cranky, or they'll be, they won't be on
Have
their
it the way
toes. Yeah.
I have to
So it's
sleep.
hell, man. Depositions, man. That's like warfare.
It is. It is. It's like psychological warfare.
It really is.
Yeah. But it's like whatever. I mean, in my previous life for a little while, I had a little bit of law enforcement experience. So,
Mhm.
I'd been in courtrooms before, and I knew how to like testify, so it wasn't so bad. So, and like actually the court recorder, she picked up on that because she asked me during the break. She's like, "You still work in law enforcement?" I said, "Yeah." And she's like, "Yeah, I could tell by the way you were testifying." So I
Yeah,
was like,
no,
"Oh,
jujitsu really helped me with my
yeah."
legal career. I have to say,
Mhm. Mhm.
there's a lot of posturing and a lot of provocation,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
there's you have to learn. I mean, look, there's sometimes in the law, as in jujitsu, and in life,
Mhm.
there are things that you can't change that are bad for you,
Yeah.
make things inconvenient. You got to figure out a way to use those things as best you can, and not fall into the traps and pitfalls that, if you're trying, there's facts you can't change in cases, there's
Right.
law you can't change, and so you have to be creative, and you have to it's kind of like in jiu-jitsu, you take what the person gives you.
Right.
And in the law, it can be the same exact way. You got to take what you given.
Right.
You can't pretend like, I mean, a lot of times people just want to pretend like the facts are not the facts. The
Mhm.
law is
Mhm.
not the law. Um,
Mhm.
and, there's an old saying in the law, like if the facts are bad, you pound the law. And if the law is bad, then you pound the
The
facts.
facts.
And if the facts and the law are bad, then you pound the table. So,
Mhm.
it's kind of, it's it, the law, if you're a practicing attorney, or negotiating, any kind of
Mhm.
negotiation,
Mhm.
jiu-jitsu is a very good uh, uh, kind of paradigm for, you know, trying to navigate your way through kind of legal disputes.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, it is. It's true. But it's interesting how you can apply like jiu-jitsu to everyday life. I
The
mean,
principles
even,
are the same, right? Like you have the Book of Five Rings, and you have,
yeah.
the Art of War. These things are, they're ancient principles, and jiu-jitsu is just, about conflict, about interpersonal conflict, about military conflict. And jiu-jitsu is just one incarnation of, of how you deal with physical conflict. But, it's conflict is conflict. And, they say love is war and war is war. Jiu-jitsu, any one of those things is a segue into, the greater principles.
Yeah. My favorite Masashi quote from the Book of Five Rings, which I remind myself for jiu-jitsu all the time, is, "It may seem difficult at first, but everything seems difficult at first."
Yes, those are wise words.
That's awesome. I remember that's the one phrase of the whole book that just stuck in my head.
Yeah, you should get that tattooed.
I'm going to, actually. It's going to go on there somewhere. It's going to go on. Probably it's going to go on somewhere on my body. It's going to go on there. It's going to be on there for sure. In your opinion, what qualities make a good instructor?
I mean, there's so many, but if I had to pick, in a good instructor,
or a good teacher,
I think patience. I think the important thing, and this isn't just for instructors, but even for students, is to have a clear goal. If you're an instructor, that should be your student's goal, right? I mean, as an instructor, you should be helping your students achieve their goals, right? I mean, so sometimes you can say, an instructor, I want to have a group of students who are all badasses, whatever. Okay, that's not bad. That's a goal, right? And one you could work towards. But if your students are like soccer moms and, little kids, that doesn't seem to be such a appropriate goal. So I think you need to be able to teach what people want to learn. And that takes humility, it takes patience, it takes a recognition that other people's goals are not necessarily your goals.
Right.
But only so I guess the other way to put this is to try to align your goals with your students' goals. Right. So, I mean, it's kind of like we go back to, John and Enzo. I think they were great coaches and great teachers because they saw that there were different people in the room with different goals, and they tried to align their instruction with the goals of their students. Obviously, John knew that I did not want to be an MMA fighter. I did not want to be a jiu-jitsu professional competitor.
Right.
So he didn't really try to teach me or coach me that way. Right. I mean, and he knew that GSP was a high, world champion caliber MMA fighter. So what does he teach? He's teaching him the things that he needs to achieve that goal. So I think the instructor, I mean, obviously this should be true for all instructors. They all have like a mastery, or at least a curiosity, an ongoing curiosity about their craft, about what they're doing, about what they're teaching. I think there's also humility, that's necessary, right? You need to be humble about, like, I don't know everything, and my goals are not the same as everyone else's goals. And these, these aren't just like empty vessels that I fill with knowledge. But I think that's one of the keys, I think, to a great instructor is understanding your audience and having the humility to help them reach their goals and reach their fullest potential. I think that's the mark of a great instructor.
It's excellent. Well, Rich, I really appreciate you coming on and talking to me tonight. I don't want to take up your whole evening, but absolutely. But you can be reached for group classes, privates, and seminars at Samurai Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Academy. Again, it's located at 2125 Winchester Boulevard in Campbell. The phone number is 917-685-1853. There is also a website, which is bgasamurai.com. And you're also on Instagram at bgasamurais.
Yes, I am.
Awesome. Well, again, it's all true. but if any, I guess I could if anybody's interested and want to come by and they want to train at the academy,
come in.
Come on in.
Trial. Everyone's welcome. No knuckleheads are allowed. If you want to do MMA, go to AKA or wherever. But if anytime you want to come by, basically we have an open school, right? I'm always happy to have people that want to come in and train.
Yeah, and the thing that I think that's really unique about the academy too is that we're one of the only academies in the area that primarily does no gi.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right. I mean, that's the new hotness right now.
Right.
So everyone wants to do no gi.
It's a fresh hotness.
So, I listen to the people, man. I'm, right like at the last point, I want to meet the goals. I share the goals of my students. If your goal is to do no gi jiu-jitsu, that's my goal too.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much again. Have a great evening, and I will talk to you Saturday.
All right. Take it easy. Thanks, man.
Okay. It's easy. All right. Bye. All right. Did that stop? Hold on. I'll cancel.